Hey, what is up everyone? Today we're going to talk about dreams, more specifically vivid dreams of those who are close to dying. Hi, I'm Risa Morimoto, your host, and you're watching Modern Aging, where we chat about innovative and holistic ways to care for one another as we age. If you want to stay in the loop about all our latest videos, be sure to click on that pretty red subscribe button below and that little bell next to it, and you'll be sure to be notified whenever a new episode is uploaded. You can also check out our upcoming programs and sign up onto our email list on our website at thisismodernaging.com. So today's guest is Dr. Kerr. He's the Chief Medical Officer and CEO of Hospice Buffalo. He interviewed thousands of patients over the years about their dreams as they approach the end of their lives. His experience as a hospice doctor and with his patients is beautifully written in his new book. It's called Death is But a Dream, Finding Hope and Meaning at Life's End. It's out on February 11th, so you can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your favorite bookstore. He's amazing. This book is amazing. I think you're going to be really surprised by what he has to say. So check out our chat. Today we're going to talk about dreams, and very specific dreams, and dreams of those who are about to pass. How did you discover this whole fascination with dreams and what patients were telling you?
Oh, I didn't discover it at all. I was kind of the last guy coming to the church. So everybody else seemed to be aware of it, but I had no idea. When I started moonlighting at hospice, this was nothing I saw in my training. In fact, when somebody was dying when I was trained, we tend to become less involved in their care because there was less, to do medically in terms of intervention or treatment. But the people who are actually responsible for the care at the bedside, the nurses, the chaplains, the volunteers, the social workers, they seem to all be aware that people, as they were going through the dying process, were having very intense dreams or visions. But I had no idea. So it was really, I didn't discover it. It actually kind of spooked me a little bit. And so they were the ones who brought it to my attention.
And so at what point did you start seeing kind of similarities? Was it just conversations that you were having with these social workers and chaplains, or what?
No. So now for the first time I'm at hospice, and now instead of distancing myself from the dying patient, now I have to get closer to the bedside. So now I'm actually part of the care of a dying patient for the first time, and I'm struck by how universal it is. But what was really moving was that it was so inherently therapeutic. So it was one thing to deny something that was just a random occurrence, but when I saw what meaning it brought to the patient, that it was, you just couldn't turn away from it.
And so what kind of patterns were you seeing? What kind of dreams
do
they typically have?
We've measured this. So we were the first ones to really ask the patients directly and then put a quantifiable instrument together to measure what they were seeing, how comfortable it was and real, and that sort of thing. So there were very distinct patterns. And the predominant one is that as people get closer to death, they have an increased frequency in these dream experiences, and the content tends to shift. So you start to see more and more of those who have died before you.
Wow.
Yeah, and the comfort level goes up. So it's kind of this built-in process that most people seem to go through.
I mean, I feel like some people would chalk it up to having a hallucination, or maybe something because of their meds, or I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of skeptics out there, right?
Sure, our first impulse is to medicalize it and say that, this is a dying brain, this is a deoxygenated brain, this is a medicated brain, this is somebody who's delirious. So yeah, we tend to do those things. And it's true that most people who are dying have changes in cognition, changes in awareness, all those things. But the vantage point matters. So we're not talking about moments before death. We're often talking weeks before death. So and that's why it was so important to videotape these patients, is that people made assumptions that they were frail and confused and had disorganized thinking. And in fact, they're like you and I. I mean, I've got patients on film who are having these experiences who are doing their taxes or driving their cars. So it's really, really important to understand that this just isn't seconds before dying. This isn't the dying brain manifesting itself. This is actually part of the process that's upstream of that.
My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there.
So vivid and so, it was like lifelike.
if people would understand them or go poo-poo and, say, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, I think more and more people are getting a little bit more hip to dreams.
I don't know if you can share with me some of the interviews that you did and some of the dreams, what specific dreams that they were having and how they were feeling.
I mean, they're remarkable for a few things. They're remarkable for their vividness. So when we ask people to rate the reality on a 0 to 10 scale, it's 10. The common statements you hear are that these are different than other dreams. You don't understand. I don't typically remember my dreams. No, this really happened. So they tend to be very virtual, almost experiential, and very felt. So there's little said in the dreams between the dreamer and the person in the dream, but there's an enormous amount that's understood. Understood being that I'm loved, that I'm okay, that I'm reunited, that I'm not alone, that that sort of thing. And time becomes irrelevant. You can be an elder man dying, and you may have lost your mother when you were a child, but you can smell her perfume or hear her voice. So it tends to have a vividness to it that's striking.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so do they themselves describe it as a dream, or do they describe it as more like a vision?
Well, and that becomes, the nomenclature is tricky because what maybe happens is you may be having lucid dreams. So this architecture of sleep is broken up as you're dying. You're kind of in this fuzzy spot. You're sleeping more. It's intense, and you're in and out of sleep a lot. So people swear that this doesn't happen. About almost half the patients document or record that this happens when they're awake as well. So it may have the reality of being awake. So it's hard to put it into terms. I think what's important is that they're saying these are different than normal dreams. Yeah.
And what do you think the significance is for the dying and then also their families? I mean.
Yeah. Well, we've looked at that actually. So we've looked at what is the impact on the bereaved, and it's profound because I think beyond knowing that your loved one is physically comfortable, the next thing is, where are they? Are they okay? Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. If you have life partners who've been married 60 years and they lost a child together, and one spouse is looking at the other, and the person in the bed is holding the baby that they lost, that reframes, recontextualizes what loss is. So it's this notion that you're physically dying, but paradoxically you're psychologically or spiritually very alive and present. You're having another inner world that's really life affirming. So our notion of death is grim because we see it in its physical dimensions. But what's happening and what our patients are telling us is they're having other experiences that are deeply meaningful and often full of reunion and love and forgiveness, powerful themes that the vast majority of people report as extremely comforting. So when we ask them to measure the comfort provided, again, out of a scale of 5, it's very, very close to 5 out of 5.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how many of these people, so you've actually created a study?
Multiple studies.
Multiple studies.
Yeah.
And how has this been received in terms of the medical community? I mean, this is something I think that...
Oh, it's interesting. It's almost diagnostic of the problem, because we, in medicine we deal less with the subjective experience. So we do kind of absurd things to dying people, like take their blood pressure, right. But really we don't ask the important questions enough. Where are you? Are you okay? Do you feel safe? Are you comfortable? Those things that are felt. The subjective elements that we tend to, pay attention to less. And the response to the medical community is fascinating. So I did this in part because I was frustrated trying to teach it to students and fellows, mm-hmm. Who just had no idea that there was something going on and wanted to treat all of it as a variant of confusion. and I'm not particularly religious, but it was undeniable even to me. So again, I really personally, I tried to more. I wasn't all that comfortable with it, but it's in your face every day.
Right.
And so frustrated trying to teach it, because the retort back was, there's no evidence for this, and we lived in an evidence-based world. And actually, this has been written about, throughout time and every culture. But
thousands of years.
Right, but it comes from the arts, it comes from the humanities, it comes from religion. It doesn't come from medicine. And so medicine had very, very little to say about the topic. What had been written about were just case studies or anecdotes. And in terms of any kind of structured surveys, it's really interesting. There were studies done, but they asked caregivers, they asked doctors, nurses, priests about what they saw at the bedside. But nobody ever actually asked the person who was experiencing it.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like just understanding depression or joy, entirely an experience to self, and asking an observer. So what we did is we were the first ones who asked people, a large number of people. And what we also did is we followed them daily until death to see what happened, because this is a changing process. So, and we would ask them the survey. And it had both quantitative pieces to it and qualitative pieces to it, and we videotaped patients.
So, for example, what are some of the questions that you were asking them?
Are you having dreams and visions? Are they happening when you're awake or asleep, or both? We had content that you could pick from, like a catalog. What were you seeing? Comfort that was provided, the reality, and then more open-ended questions. What do you think this means? That kind of thing. And so we published that and heard absolutely nothing from the medical community. Zero.
Wow.
Yeah, but this is where it gets interesting. And it's also kind of diagnostic. It then went to the non-medical community and went around the world, literally around the world. And it was in Huffington Post and New York Times.
Which I saw and I read.
Scientific American. Yeah, I went through all of these things. But I think what's fascinating is the dichotomy, this weird kind of paradox between the people who are experiencing dying, the patients and the families, and the people who are responsible for providing the care. So
there's
one
this
can't
kind
say
of
no.
vast
Yeah.
gap.
And what's really interesting is that the response to things like the TED Talk, they're thankfully not responding to me. What they're doing is they're identifying with the experience. They're given permission, they're given a context to understand what they've witnessed. Mm-hmm. So if you see the comments, which are overflowing, they're not responding to the presenter. They're finally able to say, oh, I saw this. That's what happened to my mom. I didn't realize that this is so universal. So it's been fun to see it spread.
No, it's fascinating. And after I saw your TED Talk, there was, having sick parents and knowing that death is somewhat on the horizon, knowing that there's comfort. Both my parents have seen a lot of death. And it's funny because I did ask my mom once, I said, if once you die, who's the first person that you want to see? And she said, my mom. And she lost her mom when she was like 8. Mm-hmm. And she's an 83-year-old woman. And I just found that so amazing that, and after I listened to your talk, that maybe that's possible, right?
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that I'm personally it never loses its effect on me, because we think of dimensionalities of time. So when we look at an old person, we don't think of their child self.
Right.
And yet what you come away from these experiences, realize that this connectivity between and across lives, whether they're living or whether they're dead, don't go away. That it really is incredible to see an old man talk about being in his mother's kitchen and smelling her cooking and her perfume and those sorts of things. Like it's palpable to folks, but it's also incredibly reaffirming of life. That they could be gone 85 years, but they're still very much present, and they come back to them. And if there's a theme in this work, it's the people who loved you right, who nurtured you, who secured you, who taught you. Those are the ones that tend to come back. The people who withheld love, conditioned love, they tend to be kept out.
So they don't see them at all?
No. Oh, no, no, no. So it's extraordinarily common that one parent was the one that, felt with their heart and lived with their heart, and they're there and the other person isn't.
Wow.
So those stories recur again and again and again and again.
And you mentioned also that people see their pets.
Very commonly, yeah.
Because we have a lot of pets, dead pets.
Yeah.
That I'd love to see again.
Yeah. And children, interestingly, the children that we have and we have documented and videoed, they tend to see their pets, because if you think about it, they often don't know people who have died. But they're more likely to know pets who have died. And when we ask them, what's the significance? It means that I'm going to be okay. I'm not alone. I'm comfortable, what have you.
Yeah, so some of the videos that I saw, especially with the young kids, there was an amazing sense of calmness and peace to the way they would talk about their dreams.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When you see them on the video, they're saying they're like, they're all zen.
Yeah,
like, they're just
completely.
Very matter of fact. What's interesting is it's hard for adults to have language for death to a child. But they somehow become informed from these experiences. So in the one video, it's interesting, she creates a castle, first of all, so she's safe and she's secure. And there's light and coming through a window. And then she proceeds to tell you about 7 animals that are there. And they weren't all hers, only one was, I think. The rest were animals she knew of other people had, ferrets and birds and everything, and they're all there. And they're all healthy. So they bring the dead back to them and tell them they're okay. And they'll tell you, like they did in the videos. Isn't it remarkable?
And you told me that you thought that, oh, Mom, I saw an angel. That's how you
And
said
I
you
thought
felt,
I
and you
saw an
felt peace,
angel.
and then
I
you were
felt
able to go to
peace.
sleep.
And then I was able to go to sleep.
So it was really comforting.
That was comforting, yes.
You weren't afraid.
I wasn't afraid of it at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I'm going to be okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not alone. Yeah.
With really a sense of confidence and certainty. That's what's
Well,
amazing to.
Yeah, they're
It's
truth
just
tellers, right?
yeah.
So they're uninhibited in describing what their experience is. They just tell you very matter-of-factly, oh yeah, and then I saw this and I saw that.
It's amazing. So now you have created a book
Yeah.
that talks about this whole experience of yours, all these years of study to kind of share with the world. How did the book kind of come about, and tell me a little bit about what's inside?
I started to read the comments from wherever it was published, and it's, from around the world. And what I was struck by was how much it meant to people. So I didn't have a lot of faith that I was going to change medical culture, but the people who are actually going through this and who can advocate and who are actually at the bedside of their loved ones, when I saw the response that it had, and how meaningful it was, and how many people are walking around having experienced this 30 years ago and not knowing what it meant or could mean, then I just realized it had enormous value, like much bigger than I thought. So my audience shifted. I started to wanting to reach to my side of the fence, which is my fellow colleagues and my colleagues in medicine, and I was really talking to the wrong choir. It needed to be the people who dying needed to be humanized in a way that it actually happens in the dimensions that it's experienced, and it's best to go to the family. And you asked the question about the bereavement. Our studies there are remarkable. I mean, it does change how people experience their loss. Just like you said, if you watch your mom and she gets to reunite with her mother, that's going to greatly experience in how you perceive where she is, how is she, and maybe what does it all mean? Is she put back together? And that's really what seems to happen, is we are put back together in very interesting ways.
Now I'm gonna cry. But it's true. There's this like enormous, I guess, not that we can ever have a real answer, but to know that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, think of where this conversation has gone. So when you started about dying, you talked about put it in physical terms, the first thing you went to is, oh boy, there must be all this physical pain and suffering. It's got to be replaced, right? So death becomes a fear-based event. Think how you've changed in this conversation. Now you're almost, I wouldn't say hoping, but you're less frightened by the proposition that perhaps there's also this soulful experience.
Oh, yeah.
That maybe she's given comfort and meaning in ways,
It's everything.
that are yeah. And again, it's the lens through which we look at dying, and illness appropriately needs to be assessed and determined in its physical dimensions, because that's how we base everything. In terms of your practical needs in the home, what treatment you get, what drugs you need, all of that. But beyond the inevitable dying, when you can't change the course of it anymore, then there's this other thing that's happening, and there's this whole deeply rich introspective piece, this inner world piece that we don't really explore. Yet when you ask the dying patient, they're telling us, no. This really has happening to me, and this is giving me immense comfort.
There's a lot of, I don't know if there's I feel like there is a movement, for people to talk more about end-of-life issues and that sort of thing. And I've heard about people like having like these end-of-life celebrations, right? So instead of sadness and people like sitting by a bedside, I don't know if you've seen any of this, but like really people celebrating the life that they had, and kind of trying to end on this high note as opposed to this very somber, we're losing somebody. I don't know if you've seen any of that, or...
I've seen a little bit of it as, the celebration of life versus the focus on the dying. I don't think that we have to work that hard. We just have to ask the patient what's going on. What's their experience.
Do you feel like there's a culture shift?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's part of a culture of people reclaiming. I think people almost have a consumer view of medicine. They don't accept on faith. I'll take what you have, but I'm not so sure. They're asking good questions. And we're going back to what we did, which was not put the dying on a shelf, but reclaim some of it, I think that death has gone through this institutional phase where actually now we're going back to what it was. It was something the family owned.
With future readers of your book, and all the years of study that you've done, what would you like for people to walk away with?
Oh, I just like them to open their eyes to the idea that death has another dimension. That doesn't necessarily, I'm not trying to say there's this, I'm not speaking to the afterlife, I'm not speaking to a religious perspective, but more of that's something we as humans have this other spiritual experience in dying that's more uplifting than what the physical dimension offers us. And it's a chance to reclaim the life that was led. It's a very interesting time.